Rick Harrison's story is often told as a rise from obscurity to television fame, but the truth is less cinematic and more human, shaped by instability, discipline, and long stretches of uncertainty. Born into a military household, his early life moved with the rhythm of orders and relocations, never allowing roots to form deeply in any one place. The world he grew up in did not offer permanence, only transitions. That instability, paired with personal health struggles and a childhood marked by misunderstanding, created a boy who learned early that comfort was not guaranteed. Yet within that environment, something unusual formed, an instinct for observation. He watched people closely, noticed how value was assigned, and began to understand that survival often depended not on strength alone, but on perception. Long before cameras, contracts, or fame, there was simply a boy learning how to adapt to a world that kept shifting beneath his feet. Childhood marked by motion and disconnection, Rick Harrison's childhood unfolded under the weight of constant relocation due to his father's military career. Each move meant abandoning familiarity, friends, teachers, routines, just as they began to feel stable. For a young mind, this created a sense that nothing was permanent, and that attachment carried an expiration date. Schools were temporary stages where he had to repeatedly restart social connections, often arriving as the outsider who knew no one. This cycle gradually shaped his personality into one that was observant rather than expressive, analytical rather than trusting. While other children built long-term friendships, he learned to read rooms quickly, to understand social hierarchies without needing to be part of them. These early experiences didn't just create resilience. They developed a form of emotional distance that would later serve him in business, where reading people mattered as much as understanding numbers or objects of value. The hidden weight of epilepsy and isolation at around 8 years old, Rick's life took another difficult turn when he experienced his first epileptic seizure. In an era when medical understanding and public awareness were limited, epilepsy often carried stigma and fear. For a child already struggling to find stability, this condition added another layer of separation from his peers. Episodes disrupted school life and made concentration unpredictable, turning ordinary academic expectations into ongoing challenges. More difficult than the physical symptoms was the social impact. Children who do not understand difference often respond with avoidance or silence, and Rick found himself increasingly isolated. Instead of retreating, however, he began to compensate in another way. Through reading, books became a private world where he could control pace, direction, and understanding. Over time, this self-directed education grew far beyond school requirements, laying the foundation for a mind that valued independent thinking over structured instruction. Learning beyond the classroom walls, formal education for Rick Harrison was inconsistent at best and interrupted at worst. Frequent relocations and health complications meant that his academic path never followed a steady trajectory. But instead of accepting the limitations this imposed, he began constructing his own curriculum outside the classroom. Libraries borrowed books and personal curiosity replaced structured lessons. He gravitated toward subjects that explained how the world worked: history, economics, strategy, and biographies of individuals who had built influence or wealth from modest beginnings. This self-driven learning method was not guided by grades or institutional approval, but by curiosity and necessity. It also reinforced a pattern that would define his adult life: the ability to identify value where others did not immediately see it. While his peers focused on completing assignments, he was quietly building a framework for understanding systems, negotiation, and human behavior. Las Vegas and the decision to step away eventually, Rick's family settled in Las Vegas, a city defined by contrast, wealth and loss existing side by side, often on the same street. It was here that his world sharpened further. Las Vegas was not just a city of entertainment. It was a place where risk and reward were constantly visible, where fortunes could change in a single moment. By his teenage years, Rick had already become disillusioned with traditional schooling. At 17, he made the decision to drop out, a choice that might have appeared like failure from the outside, but felt like clarity from within. He was no longer willing to follow a system that did not align with how he learned or thought. Around this time, his father offered him something different from education, work. Not as a fallback, but as a different form of learning, one rooted in experience, responsibility, and direct engagement with the real world. The pawn shop and the school of experience, the gold and silver pawn shop, was not a glamorous beginning. It was a modest business in a city filled with risks, takers, dreamers, and people in financial distress. Rick entered this environment not as a polished professional, but as a young man learning through exposure. Every day behind the counter became an education in human behavior. People arrived with objects they valued deeply, often tied to personal stories, financial pressure, or emotional attachment. Rick had to assess not only the worth of items, but also the motivations of the individuals presenting them. This required a combination of knowledge, patience, and intuition. Over time, he developed an ability to recognize authenticity in objects and people alike. The pawn shop became his classroom, teaching him negotiation, valuation, and the psychology of decision-making under pressure. Building a business in uncertain ground, the early years of the pawn shop were defined by financial instability and constant pressure. Revenue fluctuated, and survival depended on careful decision-making rather than rapid growth. Las Vegas itself added complexity, as the surrounding environment exposed the business to both opportunity and volatility. Rick and his father operated in a space where trust was essential but not guaranteed. Each transaction carried risk, and mistakes could have lasting consequences. Despite these challenges, Rick began to refine his approach. He studied items brought into the shop with increasing precision, learning to distinguish between perceived value and actual market worth. This ability gradually built the shop's reputation, attracting not only individuals in financial need, but also collectors and enthusiasts who recognized the value of expertise. What began as a small family business slowly developed into a trusted point of reference in a city built on uncertainty, family, responsibility, and personal strain alongside professional development. Rick's personal life was undergoing its own transformations. He married young and became a father, experiencing both the grounding and the pressure that come with family responsibility. His children, Corey and Adam, became central figures in his life, even as the demands of work intensified. The pawn shop required long hours and constant attention, leaving limited space for separation between professional and personal identity. Over time, this imbalance created strain in his relationships, contributing to marital breakdowns and emotional distance. Like many driven individuals, Rick found himself navigating the tension between building stability for his family and being physically present within it. These experiences shaped his understanding of success, revealing that achievement in one area often comes with sacrifice in another, especially when time becomes the most limited resource. From local business to cultural phenomenon, the transformation of the pawn shop into a global television phenomenon was not immediate or expected. When production crews arrived to film inside the store, the concept was simple: document real transactions and interactions in a pawn shop environment. However, what emerged was something larger. Pawn Stars resonated with audiences because it combined education, history, and human storytelling within everyday exchanges. Viewers were drawn to the authenticity of the interactions and the unexpected significance of objects brought through the doors. Rick's presence, shaped by years of negotiation and observation, became central to the show's identity. The business was no longer just a local operation, it had become part of global entertainment culture. Fame introduced new pressures, but it also amplified the very skills Rick had been developing since childhood, reading people, understanding value, and navigating complex conversations under scrutiny. Success, loss, and the weight of time. As success expanded, so did personal challenges. The visibility of fame did not shield Rick from private difficulties. Family relationships experienced strain under public attention and private pressure. The most devastating moment came with the loss of his son Adam, a tragedy that reflected a broader crisis affecting countless families. This loss was not something that fame or financial success could soften. It reshaped his perspective on work, achievement, and purpose. In the aftermath, the contrast between public recognition and private grief became more pronounced. Behind the counter, the routine of business continued, but internally, priorities shifted. What once felt like accumulation began to feel less important than presence, connection, and time with those still close to him. Endurance behind the counter, even after decades of change, Rick remained connected to the place where it all began. Pawn shop continued to operate, and filming persisted, but his presence evolved. He was no longer the young man proving himself or the entrepreneur building something from nothing. Instead, he became someone shaped by decades of negotiation, success, loss, and endurance. His posture, decisions, and priorities reflected experience accumulated over time rather than ambition alone. The counter remained a constant, but his relationship to it had changed. It was no longer just a workplace, it was a symbol of continuity through disruption. The business endured not because everything remained the same, but because it adapted alongside the people who built it. A legacy measured in more than value. Rick Harrison's life cannot be reduced to fame, television, or financial success. It is a narrative shaped by adaptation, resilience, and the continuous balancing of personal and professional worlds. From a childhood marked by movement and illness to a career built on observation and negotiation, his journey reflects a form of success that emerged from uncertainty rather than privilege. Yet the most significant part of his story lies not in what he built, but in what he endured. Loss reframed achievement, and time redefined priority. What remains is a life still in motion, grounded in experience rather than illusion. The pawn shop stands as a physical reminder, but the deeper legacy exists in the lessons learned behind its glass about value, impermanence, and the quiet cost of building something that lasts.